Does it really matter if our paper is flat or angled?
Or tilted? Creating flawless washes in watercolour is at the core of its beauty and something we all aim for.
Do we have to paint differently based on how our paper is positioned? We can find out today. My name's Anica and I've done a lot of experimenting and I'm now going to share this with you. But mind you, you do have to do your own experiments because everything can affect how our paper and paint handle. For example, in Australia, it's 24 degrees Celsius. It's 64% relative humidity with a 50% chance of rain. And you go, so it's not a weather report. But the fact is that everything does matter. Everything affects it. If it's too humid, it dries too slow. If it's too hot, it dries too fast. If it's windy, it dries too fast. And then there's the paper, whether it's absorbent or non-absorbent or thick or thin. And now we're going to talk about whether there's a difference if it's tilted or flat.
I'm a self-taught professional artist,
and if I had known the things that I'm sharing with you in this video today earlier, I would have saved years and years of learning and practice. Learning and practice is the best possible thing, but you could possibly shortcut everything with the things that you're going to learn today in this video. So stay tuned to the end because there's loads of stuff to see.
I'm using Baohong cold press paper, 300 GSM or 140 pound. In this first example, it's on a 30-degree angle. I'm using a Rosemary & Co. Kolinsky Sable brush series 33 and my beautifully rich Daniel Smith paints. Today I'm using some Mayan orange, some Hansa yellow medium, some Prussian blue, some Mayan blue at times, but generally these three colours. If you have any paints that you don't use much of, this will be the best possible use they could be put to. I'm mixing plenty of paint, and then when I need to, I use my water dropper to add a few drops of water so that I don't keep unnecessarily washing my brush. As I lay my first brush stroke, and due to the paper being tilted, the paint quickly decides to travel down the paper, leaving behind a smooth, even coverage. Not only this, but it forms a nice bead at the bottom of the brushstroke, with all the excess paint, so it only leaves enough paint on the paper for a nice coverage, and the rest is evenly distributed to the bead. This bead also keeps our brush wetter and ready for the next stroke. And we need to keep this bead alive for maximum evenness. That means that when you see the bead reduce in size or disappear, you have to quickly add more paint. And then the bead will be at the bottom of the page, and then it needs to be mopped up. I don't need to wash my brush to mop it up, but I do need to blot my brush dry to then be able to pick up the excess bead. This was our first example. Now let's go on to the next. The next will be a flat wash on a flat surface. My paint is of the same consistency as I mixed earlier. My brush is fully loaded, just as before. As I apply the paint, that it's the thickest where I first started. As the paint isn't moving down the page, each stroke has less paint in it. When I pick up another load of paint, it'll be thicker going against a thinner load, unless we move it around but risk having too many brush strokes. And it hasn't had a chance to go anywhere because the paper's flat. So now there's no bead, and the coverage is the thickest up the top. So by the time I come to the end, well, it's not too bad, but there's a little too much paint just above the middle. The first two examples have dried, and I can see the tilted one is very smooth, and the one on the flat paper isn't too bad, but there is a slight build-up of paint right at the very top, and just above the middle. In order to eliminate this problem, there's another way, and that is to wet the paper first. So I'll ask you now, which way do you normally paint? What are you most comfortable with, flat or tilted? But did you know you actually had to paint a different way to suit? What does this mean? So look, if you would like to paint a flat wash on tilted paper, you'd need to maintain the bead. If you are painting a flat wash on flat paper, it would be best to of wetting the paper first. So in this third example, we'll do just that. We'll wet the paper first and check in the light that it's all wet, nice and glossy, without any visible pools of water. So now we can drop in the paint. And if we need to blend it out, if it's not entirely even, we can do that. Also, as you lay in the paint, it will automatically be a bit lighter because water has already been added to the paper. So if you need to go darker, you'd need to add more pigment. All three examples are dried now, and we can see that by pre-wetting the flat paper, it'll be equally as nice as the angled one. The same applies for a gradient wash. In this example, I'm doing a gradient wash on a tilted piece of paper. So I am putting in some nice rich paint, putting in some more paint over the top to make it darker, and my bead is forming. Then I pick up some water and add it to my paint mixture, and it's a little bit thinner. Then I add some more water to my paint mixture and apply, and again it's thinner still, until I can just add just water without any paint, like now, and there's our gradient wash. Now let's do a gradient wash on a flat piece of paper by pre-wetting it first. So I'm making sure to wet the area evenly, and then I need to check it in the light to see that it's all nice and glossy without any puddles, and then I can apply some paint. I will start thicker at the top and be thinner down the bottom. When the paper is wet, and then of course the paint is wet, which I've just applied, I can still freely add more paint or blend it because nothing has started drying yet. As I reach for some water now to dilute the paint to make it a gradient wash, blot this brush on a cloth or paper towel before applying to the paper. And then I repeat. So I go for water, mix it, blot it off, and then go to the paper, until I'm just washing my brush but blotting it on the cloth before I do the final last little invisible bit. And with everything equally wet, you can blend out if you need to as well. So what do you think? Is it making more sense? Let me know. Tell me in the comments below. Now we'll go for the flat paper first and try a variegated wash. So far, for our flat and gradient washes, we've been pre-wetting the paper. Pre-wetting is the safest option, but if you didn't want to, that's okay too. All you have to do is mix colour of equal consistencies by dropping equal amounts of water into each little well and then mixing the paint, then swatching on a scrap piece of paper to check their consistencies. We cover this in a water control video that'll pop up here in the corner, so if you'd like to see that, that's a good one for it. I'm now ready to apply the yellow and then add some orange. I went straight into the orange paint with my yellow paintbrush and didn't worry about it. I didn't wash it or pat it or do anything. But now as I go into the greeny paint, I have tapped my orange brush dry so that I didn't mix it up too much. I've added some blue-green right at the very end, and now it's time to mop up the excess paint. You can either wash your brush and dry it and then mop up, or just dry your brush, it doesn't really matter. Here is another angled wash, but in this one we're going to do something bizarre. We're going to add colour, and then instead of adding paint, now after the orange, I'm just going to add some water. So here's a stroke of clean water underneath the orange, and now let's add some rich colour again. Here we go. What we can see is that starting from the yellow to orange to water to blue, everything is running down the page and only leaving what's necessary behind. The rest is travelling down to the bead. So after the blue, I've added some water again, and then after the water, some darker blue. Now for some more water into that dark blue bead, which again will create a new bead. And now a little bit of blue to finish off. Wow, that was exciting. There's no cauliflowers or anything, and a very interesting pattern. So what have we learned about tilted paper? Well, on tilted paper, we use the bead. Why? For water control. How does it do that? As the water and paint, we'll just call it paint, travels down the paper, it'll leave just enough coverage to cover the paper. The rest of the paint will travel into the bead and stay there until we move it. It'll stay wet for a while, but the top will dry quickly. So we're right into these experiments, so I had to try alternating paint and water wash on a flat piece of paper. Now, pretty risque, but it can work, provided your colours are mixed and ready to go, that you work very quickly and no interruptions. A far better way of doing this one would be on a pre-wet surface. For the sake of the exercise, here is the green, and now I'll add some water to it, but the key here is to blot out the water. You wouldn't want it sopping wet. And then lay in a stripe of the water, and then now some thicker paint, which eventually it'll merge. It's all still really equally wet. And now for another layer of water that has been blotted out again. The key is to blot out the excess water, and that's that one. But it'll look more interesting when it's dry. So this is how the variegated washes dried. Here is the angled one, and here is the flat one. It's all very interesting. As long as you blot out the excess water, you can do wonders with it. Now for number 9, and number 9 with a twist. We'll do a variegated wash on tilted paper and then turn it upside down. Picking up my very nice rich yellow paint. And I'm going to do 2 strokes of each colour. I'll try to stay within the lines this time. And now I'm going to add orange. Look at that beautiful bead. And now to this orange. So in that orange I had a bit of the yellow from before. So now I will just add orange like that. And maybe some pyrrole orange, which is redder. Look at that beautiful bead. But let's do another one. And now I'm going to add more red to this orange. I should have had a bigger piece of paper. And let's just go for something darker. So now I'm going to add like a crimson. And the colours will just run right through. But now, just for the fun of it, let's do this. Let's turn it over.
and see what will happen with these colours as they travel down the page.
This is sped up, but don't you just love it? Wow.
And this is how it dried. You get such beautiful effects with watercolour. I don't think anything can match it. I have sketched out two just about identical little sketches here. Let's rub out that line there. It's just a sky, a mountain in the distance, a hill at the back, trees and a field. And I just want to paint one on an angle and one flat.
So if you're going to paint a landscape on a flat surface, there's a few ways to go about it. Some like to paint it in sections. I mainly paint on an angle or tilted, but I might paint the details on a flat surface. A proven good way is to wet your paper first, or at least the sky. I'm going to wet my whole little paper, which is only 19 by 14 centimeters, just a bit smaller than 8 by 6 inches. I'm going to paint this the way I would with my paper laying flat. Okay, so let's say I pick up a nice little bit of burnt ochre for a little warmth in the sky. And then I'm adding a touch of this same color to cobalt blue for the top of the sky. I've decided to deepen the sky as it's very, very light with the cobalt blue and slight bit of burnt ochre mixture. Now I'm moving onto the hill with raw sienna, blending it into the wet paper as far as it goes, and then adding some serpentine green for the grass in the foreground. It's way too wet to do anything else to it, so I just have to make sure I don't have any puddles, mop up the sides of the masking tape and also wipe them with a tissue and leave it to dry. But remember, I did tell you that it's pretty humid here in Australia, so it's not drying very quickly. But at least I'll move on to the next painting, which is the tilted one. To paint on the tilted one, it's about 30 degrees. I'm not pre-wetting. I'm just going in with a similar blue for the sky, washing my brush and adding a little bit of burnt ochre to warm up the sky. Now for some raw sienna for the hill, and I'm blending it out with some water. The paper's very dry, so my brush drags along the paper a bit, and I have to work it in more. And now I'll do the same on this painting, add some green down the bottom. The flat painting is still very, very wet and glossy, but this one that I've just been working on is nearly dry at the top. As gravity does its thing, the paint travels down the paper very quickly. If the angle of the paper was less, then of course the paint would travel at a slower pace. The paint in the sky is damp, so the only way to go into it is to use paint with less water than before, or in other words, thicker than before. I've mixed a little bit of buff titanium into some cobalt blue with a touch of burnt ochre and am adding in the distant mountain. As the paper's tilted, the mountain I've just put in is travelling down and creating a very interesting tree line on the distant hill. I really like that. If I like this the way it is, and if I wanted to stop any further movement, I could pull out the hairdryer and stop it in its tracks, but for now I'm just going to leave it. Most of this paper's damp, with the top nearly dry and the bottom the wettest. I'm mixing some serpentine green with a bit of burnt ochre for the row of trees. As you can see, the edges on the tops of the trees aren't quite as fuzzy. I'm using my brush on its side to create a textured tree effect. And whilst the foliage is still wet, I can connect the green masses with some branches and trunks. I've added some cobalt blue and burnt ochre to the green mixture to make it darker, and then darker again. I'm doing all this on the tilted paper, and my flat one is still very, very wet. Adding in some more trunks and branches and dark bits. Lovely painting on this damp, wet surface. The colours are rich and playful, and you can still correct things if you put them in the wrong spot. I've added some blue, grey, green for a distant tree top or just distant trees. I've pulled out my palette knife and am scratching in some tree trunks. The foreground is still pretty wet, so I'll experiment with a little field in the front there. I'm just playing with some of the texture of this field, and this smaller brush I'm using now is a size 2 Fumi brush. I'm adding a bit of goethite brown. The colours I've been using today have been from Daniel Smith, and this colour will just separate the front green grass from the field. I can also turn the painting upside down and see how that will help with some texture. I've basically finished this painting, and my first flat one is still wet. But let's move on. So, as I said, it's pretty wet still. It's been about 10 minutes, and I'm now mixing a very similar blue color, cobalt blue, with a little bit of burnt ochre in it, and putting in the mountain. It's not too bad, it's okay, it's a little bit fuzzy, to be expected, it's wet on wet. Now for some raw sienna for the closer hill, and I can see I forgot to change brushes, never mind, and just blending it out. I'm adding the trees with the serpentine green, a bit of burnt ochre, and using my brush on its side again for the textured effect of the trees, and also putting in the trunks and the branches. I like leaving little gaps between the clumps of foliage, as it helps to give the trees a little bit more volume and depth. This is now all wet in wet on a flat surface. Very wet. I've now added more cobalt blue and burnt ochre to my green for the darker bits. Most Australian trees are very olivey or even grey. They're not very bright green at all. And now for a bit of a raw sienna field out the front, and also shadowed in with a little bit of the goethite. Due to the nice roughness of this cold press paper, I'm still able to use the dry brush technique on this wet paper, and it still makes a little impact for the grasses behind the field. I'm now deepening the foreground grass with the serpentine green because the wet and wet made it very, very pale, and I think that'll be then enough for this little painting, which basically was all in one go because it was just so wet. Oh yes, we can't forget the palette knife and to scratch in a few tree trunks.
Here are now the two landscapes that were both painted wet in wet. The first one here is the angled one. The paper is exactly the same, but look at the texture on the angled one versus the flat one.
The texture on the tilted one is far smoother than the flat one, which has become very granulated.
The flat one, it was pre-wet and the colour was dropped in. But of course it makes sense because the pigment settles into the little crevices of the textured paper. But it's interesting because knowing that, you can go for one or the other depending on what you like. Now we have the hills.
I really like the way the distant mountain has travelled into the closer hill and created that lovely texture of trees, whereas nothing much has really happened on the flat one.
Then the trees. What I like about the angled one is the different textures in slightly harder and softer edges. But then on this one, you know, if you wanted trees in the distance, you would want them to be fuzzy, and then you can put more harder lines in the front of them.
On the tilted one, I really love how the green bushes have travelled into the grass in front of it, making it look very organic.
They were both nice and damp for the etching with the palette knife. So there you go. You can see that whether or not you're painting on an angle or flat, it makes a difference. So you just have to decide the look you want to go for, and there you have it. That's one variable that can solve the problem. It's something to ponder on and to make the most of. Look, this is just a few of the examples that I can now keep forever in my little portfolio and refer to when I forget what something looks like or how it reacts on paper. This is just a few of them. There are more. Some are messier, like these. Look, this is when a water droplet went this way. When it went onto flat, it went everywhere. But on a tilted one, it just went straight down. It's all very interesting. Anyway, look, make your own, and depending on your paper and on your brush and on all those environmental factors, these will be different, but they'll mean something specially to you. So happy painting.